This free video is brought to you by the Team Topologies Academy. Our goal is to help organizations become more effective and more humane. If you find this video helpful, we would love for you to check out and recommend our Academy content. I want to give special thanks to Nick Tune and Kacper Gunia for being available to share their latest insights on independent value streams with domain-driven design. And they will be answering questions as well at the end of their presentation. I would like to do a very short introduction, I promise. And so I'll share my screen right now. All right. So Nick and Kacper's course is part of our Team Topologies Academy. Team Topologies Academy was created 3 years ago when we felt the need, me and Matthew Skelton, who co-wrote the book Team Topologies, we needed a way to sort of reach more people and allow us to scale the training that we were doing. But it has evolved over time, and now we have multiple courses, not just from me and Matthew, but also from people like Nick and Kacper and Eduardo da Silva, and we have more in the pipeline. The point is to bring together different approaches that are really aligned, that can align quite well. So in particular with Nick and Kacper's course, Independent Value Streams with Domain-Driven Design, it's bringing some techniques from domain-driven design to identify what should be or what might be candidate value streams, and how do we validate and how do we evolve those over time so that we can then align them to the actual teams that are going to work on those value streams, right? So that is a really good match with Team Topologies, and that's why we were really keen to have them share their ideas. So this course was published about 2 years ago, and we thought it was time to do an update, see what Nick and Kacper have been up to, what new insights they might have gained, and also to do sort of a reality check if these techniques, this approach still makes sense today, 2 years later. Is there something totally new, or is it sort of still valid? And any other sort of new insights that they might have to share with us. On the Academy, one last thing, or two last things. We do have group discounts. This means it's very helpful for teams that want to learn together and evolve together, or if you have a transformation team in your organization, for example, just you get a better deal on when you want to take multiple courses or multiple people taking a shared course. The other novelty recently is that we now support Portuguese and Spanish on our website, as well as in most of our courses. We have captions in Portuguese and Spanish, so you can see here very easily you can switch to your preferred language. If you understand Portuguese, then you can read it. If not, you need to go back to English or maybe Spanish. And that's it. It was just a very short introduction to give you context, where we're coming from, why are Nick and Kacper here. The point of this webinar is that's going to be helpful for anyone interested in these ideas, even if you didn't take the course from Nick and Kacper. For the people who might have taken the course, you might have some specific questions, and that's totally fine. That's also part of the goal today, to ask, not for you to ask questions and for them to answer questions that you might have had as you went through the video-based course. So without further ado, let's move on to the real content, right, from Nick and Kacper. I'm gonna stop my screen share. Here we go. Yeah, so thank you again to both of you for agreeing to join and dedicate your time to this. Like I said earlier, for the attendees, feel free to ask questions here in the Zoom, in the Q&A. That's the best. I will be moderating, so I'll be looking at the questions and then choose which questions to pass on to Nick and Kacper if there are too many, but hopefully we'll get to most of them, if not all of them. Right, Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manuel, for this opportunity. Always good to catch up, share insights. Thanks to everyone who came. Just going to do my quick screen share here. So I'm going to try and give you some insights from over the last couple of years. If you have questions I don't cover, I imagine that will be the case. Always happy to have questions on social media. One of the principles I live by is if someone asks me a difficult question, I might not have an answer, but the next time someone asks me the difficult question, I will have an answer. So whatever your question is, I'm always happy to receive it. So let's get some latest insights. So what happened in the last 2 years? If you've seen the training course, you'll notice I've had a haircut. I might have even had two. I can't remember. I don't keep track of haircuts because they're not a very common thing. I've also been working hard on my French, actually. Got my B1 level, going for my B2 level, and I'll be doing my first conference talk in French in a few months. So everyone else who already speaks 2 languages is like, yeah, so what? That's normal. For me, it's quite a big thing. But what happened in the world that was important, and I think for me, a lot of important things have happened, but the Posh and Becks meme are absolutely massive, changed one of the defining moments of the last few years, I think. If you've got any favorite versions of this meme, drop it in the chat, send it me on social media. I can't get enough of it. I think we also have to acknowledge the world has gone AI crazy. I think we're still seeing how that might impact our work. It might have an impact on team topologies. Probably not so much just yet, but the potential is there. So I think that's one to keep an eye on. Did manage to finish my architecture modernization book. I wasn't sure if I would finish it, had lots of ups and downs, started it during the pandemic, but yeah, it came out in January this year. It's been pretty awesome to achieve that. Had a lot of good conversations. A lot of people have contacted me about the ideas in the book. A lot of the stuff in the course we did is in that book as well, so there's a lot of overlap. I've been up to quite a few different things that will have an impact on the insights I got from the last 2 years. I think working as a consultant, seeing companies in different regions, mostly Europe, USA, Canada, UK. Did get a trip down under to Australia, worked with a company in New Zealand for a bit. That was very interesting. Touched on different domains from transport, logistics, EV charging infrastructure was very interesting, payments, payroll, HR, where I'm working now. Also got to work with companies in clinical oncology space. So seeing a lot of diverse industries where these concepts apply or don't apply. I'll get to that shortly. Been to a lot of conferences. I may have met some of you at various events around the world, or speaking to a lot of people. There's so much happening, and yeah, it's just great to meet lots of different people working on different projects in government, public sector, private sector. So many interesting things out there that also influence what I'm going to share with you today. Me and Casper were the organizers of the DDD London meetup. We've been doing meetups, I would say once a month, one every 2 months on average over the last couple of years. So we've had some good sessions there, a lot of insights again coming through the meetup. I think one of the interesting ones we had recently was Barry O'Reilly, who's been talking about residuality theory, talking about how you can verify and test your architecture and therefore your organization structure, your team topologies, with the concept of stressors. Very interesting topic. Definitely recommend checking out that one. That's been a big idea from the last 2 years. And currently I'm a staff engineer for a French company. It's going through a lot of business transformation and tech transformation. So again, a lot of insights coming out from that journey. I'm working there as a staff engineer 5 days a week. So having worked as a client with different companies, now one company dedicated for 5 days a week, got some quite diverse insights. So that's what I've been up to. The question you probably care about is, what have you learned, Nick? Don't want to hear your life story. I want to know what you've learned and how that applies to me and what I'm working on. So I think firstly, a couple of simple ones. I think sometimes people get the wrong impression from some of the words we use, like independent. Independent doesn't mean we have teams that don't talk to each other, that don't collaborate. Independence is a range. When we talk about independent, we mean highly independent. For a lot of decisions, a lot of things the team works on, they can work without blockers, without handovers, without decisions outside the team being made on their behalf. So when we talk about independent value streams, we mean highly independent, not completely totally independent. So just a small clarification there. I think another one of these small things that isn't really a big topic, but does come up very often, is what do these words mean? Domain, subdomain, bounded context, business capability. Whilst it is important to have a clear definition, I find a lot of people are looking for a perfect definition. And they say to me, well, you say a domain's this, they say a subdomain's this, they talk about bounded context over here. And at some point, trying to find this perfect definition stops becoming useful, and it takes our focus away from actually what is useful. So my advice here is have some definitions that make sense in your organization, and I wouldn't try and do more than that. And even if your definitions don't match other definitions outside your company, that might be okay. I would say, in my experience, have the objectives, have the objectives changed? Has the kind of work changed? Have organizations changed dramatically? And I would say, no, not really. I think companies are still looking for teams with fast flow. I think, again, companies are still running into issues with legacy, old ways of working, old organization structures, legacy software. And so even if they can move quickly in a greenfield, after a couple of years, they're slow, they've got legacy, and they're like, we can't go as quickly as we want to. We actually can't build things we want to. We can't expand into new countries because the way we work is so inefficient. We've got so much legacy, it's slowing us down. So loosely coupled software, independent teams that can work autonomously. Honestly, these are what people are coming to me the most about. It's what we're working on at PayFit at the moment. All the clients I've worked with, this was the thing they were looking for. So for me, this hasn't really changed. This is still the goal that companies are looking for. Still need loosely coupled software and independent teams if you want to be innovating as a company over a longer period of time. And so from that point of view, my honest feeling is that team topology, stream-aligned teams, supported by the other team types is still the right approach. I haven't seen anything that's made me think, oh, wow, AI or some other organizational approaches or some agile scaling frameworks. Nothing I've seen from any of those things has made me think, oh, wow, okay, we've got to change our mindset and adopt some new thinking here. Stream-aligned teams, for me, still the main idea. Platform teams that provide a good developer experience. Enabling teams, I'll talk about a bit about later. For me, those things are still crucial, and we're still trying to achieve those things with the team topologies mindset. I'm still using the same techniques as well. A lot of the sameness going on here. But again, I think because the fundamental goals are the same, we still have to understand our business. We still need event storming to map out how the business currently works. We still have to make important prioritization decisions. Where do we focus? Where do we try and achieve stream-aligned teams? Most importantly, what's the 6-month roadmap versus the 3-year roadmap? Companies still facing these decisions all the time about where to focus. When you've got lots of legacy, when you've got a vision of a future where your software architecture is different and your team structure is different, you got to make very difficult decisions around where to prioritize, balancing transformational work with product feature work. So again, core domain charts is crucial for understanding how do different people see the different parts of our company. Do we all have the same clear definition of what our core domain is, where we build, where we buy? So again, core domain charts, other tools as well, like Wardley mapping, still useful. And for me, message flow modeling, still one of the most important tools to help me answer the question, does this make sense as software? Can we implement this as software? Have we got the boundaries right? Have we got the interactions right between the different pieces of software to ensure that the software will be loosely coupled and the teams will be autonomous? So a lot of the same things. Is there anything different, you might be wondering? I think there might be a few different things. So I would say the biggest difference for me over the last 2 years, if I'm completely honest with you, is that I've put a lot more effort into the things that happen between the workshops, a lot more effort into conversations, talking to people one-to-one, trying to really understand what's important to people. People share a lot of different information in a one-to-one setting versus in a workshop with lots of other people. So I think if you're on this independent value streams journey, all the big techniques are still important, but having these one-to-one sessions, go and talk to people that you might not normally talk to. Try and talk to as many people as you can in finance, sales, marketing, CEO, CTO, other teams you don't work with. Just have some unstructured conversations, see what you learn, and just try and identify what's important to this person. What's their top priorities? What's keeping them up at night? What are the things they want that they currently can't have because it's not possible? And if you can understand what's important to a lot of people in your company, when it comes to making decisions about your architecture and your team structure, you'll be able to shape a narrative and make decisions where you know this is what people want. This is going to help people achieve the goals they've told me about. Something else that's important is the hidden complexity. In most companies, there's a hidden spreadsheet or some other manual process that's holding parts of your company together. And you want to discover this as early as possible, because if you identify your target software architecture and your team structure, your value streams, and then you realize, oh, there's a bunch of complexity over here, and we don't have any more teams to put working on that, and we only have one person who knows about it, it could become a problem in the future. So identify the hidden complexity and make that part of your thinking. And so I think a lot of this comes up in those one-to-one sessions, but also, again, using event storming, digging in, asking really difficult questions, inviting people to your event storming sessions who you might be thinking, oh, there's nothing in this workshop that interests those people. You might be surprised. So really try and dig in and look for hidden complexity. It's come up in a lot of workshops. Something else I found very useful is to think about not just individual techniques, not just about your journey, but specific periods where you do some work collaboratively and intensively. Me and my friend Eduardo, he calls these we call these Kickstarter workshops. And the idea is we want to do some transformational work as a company, but if we're just doing an hour meeting here and an hour meeting there, maybe a couple of hours online, progress can be very slow, momentum slow. So what we recommend is getting together in person for 3 to 5 days, a mix of business and tech. And the idea is to go all the way through from your business and product strategy to do some event storming, to think about the current state, to talk about teams and ways of working, and to try and start putting together that roadmap, like, where could we start next week? What are the key areas to focus on? When we go away from this workshop, how can we keep that momentum moving and start making progress? And the thing about these workshops, you do make decisions, you do move quickly, but it's also changing the mindset. When you come to do transformational work, like moving to independent value streams, people are going to be used to working in a different way, in not a team's apologies aligned way. And you've really got to try and change that mindset of transformation is the normal here. Doing this transformational work is the most important work, not just building features or working in the old legacy systems. This transformational vision we have to make that everybody feel like that's important. And when you have these workshops and everyone's together and you spend some days in person and people are working with people they haven't worked with before, you've got product and tech and sales and marketing. Maybe these people have never been in the same room as each other or never worked together. And these moments can be extremely powerful in like really unlocking that mindset and making people think, do you know what? This might actually be something that could work in the company. A lot of people are normally thinking, oh, we have this new CTO or new CEO. They've got these new ideas about team topologies. In 6 months, it will all fall apart and they'll be gone. But these big workshops can really change that mindset. People think there is something very different here about how we work. And this project, this journey we're on, it could be successful. And I do want to highlight that a little bit, because a lot of times I see a lot of developers, for example, who are being told about this loosely coupled architecture, streamlined teams, and they don't really feel it. They're not really excited by it. They may have seen it before in the company where there were these big ideas and nothing happened. And I find what's very powerful is when the CTO or the CEO or people at that level come to these workshops and they talk directly to people in the teams and they tell them how important this transformational work is. I see that having such a really powerful impact. Sometimes you're in a workshop and you're like, come on, think big. If we had to redesign the architecture and reorganize the teams, let's think about what this ideal future could look like. Imagine you have a blank checkbook and anything's possible, and still people are struggling to really think outside the box. Suddenly, CTO comes in, he explains how important this transformational work is, and people are way more engaged and have way more belief. So here's an example workshop. Here's the kind of thing you can imagine. We mapped out this whole part of their business on the wall with all these orange events. And then you can see at the top, these yellow strips. We identified around about 15 subdomains here. We had 60 people here. You don't need 60 people, but it was certainly interesting from a dynamics and facilitation perspective. So this is the kind of atmosphere, this is the kind of space you need. You can see a lot of space here, a lot of wall space, a lot of space for people to move around. Yeah, here was where we found an Excel spreadsheet with a manual process. The developers didn't know about this, so a lot of discoveries there. So the final point I would make is thinking about how you're going to facilitate this journey. You might have great workshops, you might have a perfect architecture design, you might know exactly what your streamline teams need to be, but it might be a year, 2, 3 years, possibly even more, until you reach that goal you're trying to get to. And the goal might change. So you have to think, how do we keep things moving? How do we stop just going back to building product features and not doing our transformational work towards independent value streams? Me and my friend Eduardo, we talk about architecture, modernization, enabling teams. And the goal of these teams is to basically identify what's slowing our journey down. Is it priorities issue at leadership level? Is it teams that don't have the skills to do the re-architecture work needed? And the important point is, if you're doing a big journey like this, and you're just expecting people to suddenly switch to doing this work from the work they've been doing before, it's not going to happen. So you need some kind of enabling team who are focused on keeping things moving, identifying when things have got stuck, and they skilled at solving all those problems. But the key thing is the enabling mindset. These people don't just go into a team and do the work for them. An enabling team goes into the team and helps the team to be sufficient, to build their own roadmaps, to prioritize their own work, to work in the legacy system, to understand and apply teams' policies, concepts. So it's very much skills and expertise and coaching and mindset. But definitely one of the biggest takeaways for me is using enabling teams better, picking the right people and setting them up to think about this journey and how to keep this journey moving. And that's everything from me. I'll hand over to you, Kacper.
Thanks, Nick. Okay. Thanks for that. Thank you for the invitation, Manuel. And it's been interesting 2 years for me. I've been mostly focused on working with one organization on different levels, from being a manager to also being an architect, an individual contributor, and so on. So it's a slightly different experience than what Nick has presented. But what I appreciate in this experience is that at least I have, well, I'm not saying Nick doesn't, but I had an opportunity to see the outcomes of the decisions, of the actions, to see these longer feedback loops being closed. So that's very useful, and that's very, very valuable for me to be able to reflect on it. And one of the messages that I wanted to get across during this webinar, and Nick already stressed that, is we really need to nail it and then scale it. So we talk a lot about in our training about, mapping out the subdomains, finding out how we can model these independent value streams, how we can model the teams, architecture, business, and everything. But you cannot do it all at once. And there is a huge shift that needs to happen in most organizations when it comes to the ways of working, ways of building software before it can actually become productive. And this is, this slogan, nail it and scale it. That's something that Matthew has mentioned, and I really remember this because it's very sticky slogan for me. And that's one of the examples that I wanted to talk through. That's what I've observed, and what I notice is that you might have an organization that has a couple of well-defined software services doing their own job. But in many organizations, you have this big ball of mud or big distributed ball of mud, because we moved on from just big balls of mud to microservices now, and they are still muddy and tangled and complex. And you see that there is a lot of problems with this. And if you try to overlay teams on top of that, as you can see that there are some teams that are owning these individual services, but there is a lot of contention on this big ball of mud, because a lot of teams need to change this, and this is causing a lot of problems as well, because you have a high cost of change, low flow of value delivery, and if you add on top of that somewhat outdated ops practices and doing things like we used to do 10, 15 years ago in terms of infrastructure and operations, it really doesn't help. So if you don't have these well-defined teams that can do their out-of-hours support, it's not really going to work that well. So the issues you might have, or the issues I've noticed with some of those approaches, is that you have this slow flow of change, you have the inter-team dependencies, very high level of coordination, low degree of ownership, and really misaligned incentives. So if I really believe, and that's the hill that I'm willing to die on, is that if the team that is building the software isn't supporting it out of hours, you're not going to get good software. And that's for me full stop. And it really changes the mindset of people building it if they know they'll be awake in the middle of the night if something goes wrong. And it's good to realize that this issue exists, and there is ways of solving those issues. And we show you some of the techniques how we can do this, right? So we can go through all these workshops with event storming, message flow modeling, wordly mapping, and node mode, and might distill this perfect picture that these are our subdomains, whatever is the definition of the subdomain is. And it seems okay, it seems very reasonable, but what is also very tempting is to go straight from this picture to saying, okay, so we'll have team 1 supporting the one subdomain, team 3 supporting 2 other subdomains, team 2 supporting its own, and so on, and hoping that this is magically going to work because they read about the Conway's law, and Conway's law states, oh, if you have a team structure set up in a certain way, the software underlying system is going to reflect it. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And that rarely happens in systems that are very rigid, right? In systems that are hard to change, this almost never happens, right? You don't have incentives to refactor those bits away. Also, you don't have working practices to be able to work in an independent way, to have this individual flows of value being delivered. So I think it's really unreasonable to expect that just by assuming we have the teams set up, that the Conway's law will do its magic, and we cannot fix all the issues across the whole department at once either. And that's another thing that Manuel and Matthew are talking about. Is about to create this sensing organization. We introduce a change, we learn from it, and then we evolve and we add step by step. You cannot change everything at once, and that's what I'm trying to stress here, really. So what my recommendation would be is to really start with an end in mind. And what I mean by this is, like, how do you want these teams to operate, right? What are the main pain points of this current socio-technical architecture that you want to address? It might be, slow rate of deployment, or it might be a very painful ways of working with your business and so on. But you also need to think how you envision the platform to support the teams. Do you really have what it takes to have, self-service platform that teams can build independently on and have high degree of freedom, or are you not planning to change it at all and keep it, the old operations team in the background doing the out-of-hours support? Also, do you have all the approvals, budget, and so on? In some organizations, it's not easy at all to change how the teams are structured, because you have certain bodies governing it and so on. Or maybe you don't have budget to actually run out-of-hours support, and what then, right? You can have all these good ideas, but if you don't have a framework in place to make this work, that's not going to fly. And another thing is that how you will actually measure the success that you got there, right? Because you might be doing through this big reorg. It might on the surface look, it's okay, we are happy, you are delivering, but what are the objective metrics? And I injected here a couple of DORA metrics, like deployment count, lead time, and so on. But these are not the only ones. You can measure the actual business value delivered as well. Like we did with one of our modernization projects, is we measure time it takes to run a certain process, and we reduced it from 2 weeks to 1 day. We knew that was an objective metric that the modernization is going well. And we also knew that onboarding new formats went down from 3 months to, say, a couple of weeks. So that was very objective. So look for these metrics within your business, and they will be there, I promise you. It's not just technical metrics that we need to look at. But also, how do we build trust with the stakeholders, right? We can go to our management or to our businesses, how we want to do all these great things. But if there were already bridges burnt, we need to rebuild this trust. And that's something that, again, was mentioned by Nick. You need to have these conversations. You need to have good relations, and you need to be able to build them and maintain them over a long term. And the last thing is really, where do you start? And that's another recommendation I have for you here, and that's circling back to this nail it, then scale it, is to try to identify in this big ball of mud just one area that's particularly painful or particularly complex or particularly challenging or rewarding, and have a small team with the right mindset. And it might mean that you need to bring this mindset from outside of the current team to show these new ways of working, or have someone enabling this team, or like this architecture modernization teams and so on, to facilitate this journey. And in domain-driven design, there is this concept of a bubble context, where you try to modernize the model and then grow from there. And that would be my recommendation, is to start with a small area, have some bets, and say, okay, if we modernize this or if we do that, this will be the value delivered to the business. So that's my recommendation again, try to connect it to the business value that's behind this. And also start building this thinnest viable platform if you don't already have a platform in place. And that may mean is that we say, okay, we are using infrastructure as a code. We are using this set of services, databases. This is how we host things. And this can be very minimal, that you can be doing most of the work. But at least from there, you can start growing and building and deciding these are the actually useful parts of the platform that then you can replicate and use in the other teams. So that team will start growing the right mindset. And from that team, you can have another set of smaller spin-off teams that can eventually take over this distributed big ball of mud. And that's pretty much connected to the whole book that Nick wrote on the topic that I really recommend. I had a chance and pleasure also to write our case study there that was going through this process, and we did exactly that. We found individual piece of software that needed to be replaced. We proved some of the bets or some of the hypotheses we had, and then started growing from there. And the team is still going strong and delivering a lot of value. So I really believe this can work, and this is the right approach to the modernization. So nail one specific area, find out what works, what doesn't, start creating the sensing organization, and then scale it across multiple teams, across multiple departments and whatnot. So that was the biggest message that I wanted to get across. But we also got a number of questions and feedback from our course, asking for more examples mostly. And as you can see, it's hard to talk about examples because you need to be very specific to give good examples, and companies are not super willing to give away all their details. But I will try. So we had a question how to identify pivotal events in a better way, maybe. And I was trying to think of more heuristics that I'm personally using to try to identify those events. So you have, say, 100 events on an event storm, and you're looking at it and you're thinking which of these events are actually pivotal. And where I found correlation is that some of these pivotal events correlate with the metrics that business is interested in. So it might be that we have a number of signups or number of installations and so on. And if, for example, when you enter the company, sometimes you see dashboards, right? And these dashboards are showing these different numbers and so on. If you look at those dashboards, do they correlate with any of the events that you have? Because this might be the actual pivotal events, because they must be important for one reason and another. They might mean that some processes were started or some processes were finished and so on. So that's what I would be looking at. Another heuristic that I'm using is that if do we need to notify external teams, customers, systems about this event? Because if there is a lot of other external parties interested in this event, it might be significant in one way or another, and it might be pivotal. It doesn't have to be, but it might be. So that can lead you to maybe some candidates. And also, if you were to change this event in any significant way, so for example, if you want to change this schema massively, or you want to change when this event is actually published and so on, who or what would be affected by that? Because if not much, then probably it's not really interesting event. It can be just your internal domain event. But if it's going to cause an uproar and how the company is going to be mad because things change now and we, for example, changed how we measure certain things, then that's a good indication that it might be a pivotal event. I try to create, come up with some more examples. I won't be going through them one by one. You'll have access to the slides, but this is what I think might be good candidates for you. And hopefully this will maybe lead you to the discovery of better pivotal events in your inverse terms. But for me, like the main characteristic of a pivotal event is really that it's often starting or finishing a part of business process, and these business processes are important to understand, and they often signify boundaries of the subdomain. Now, on the topic that Nick already touched on, that it's not really that important how we define these domains, subdomains, and capabilities. What I was thinking is we may want to clarify this a little bit, maybe in the context of this training. So in our own context, right? How we use this, or how I try to explain it in the context of this training. So starting from the domain, in the training, how we try to present this is really the domain is high-level area in your whole organization. So you can think of it as a department, or maybe a set of departments and so on. And it's usually aligned with the structure of the organization. It's not that far. It's not like people that were there before us did a bad job. They usually did a good job, right? It's just that the software usually is not great. And it usually operates fairly independently from other domains. So if you think about it, I used to work for Starbucks. So the whole loyalty program that I worked on, that was one big domain, or the whole commerce platform, as we called it, that was a big domain. That was completely independent from, say, logistics and so on. So still part of the big company, of this big company that has hundreds of thousands of employees across the world, but it was a fairly independent domain that had multiple smaller subdomains within it. So from the industry that I'm currently working with in the music industry, what we have is this royalty processing domain that takes care about processing the usage and knowing who to pay and how much. But also have a separate copyright domain that maintains all the rights and knows basically who should be paid on a given territory, set of dates, and so on. And they are fairly big, I have to say, but there is dependency between them. There is some small coupling between them. But at large, they are operating independently. So if you go from there, again, in the context of our training, how we try to use the subdomains is that you have, within these big domains, you have specific cohesive areas of the main domain. And they really group together these related capabilities, and then they interact with other subdomains to actually deliver value. So if we drill down in this, our royalty processing domain, we could have, for example, usage ingestion subdomain that is knowing that groups all the ways of how we can ingest the usage to the system and then process the royalties. Or you have a smaller subdomain that deals with all matching of the usage to actual copyright data and so on. So these, as I can see them, are the subdomains within your big domain. And what's very important for me here is that each of these subdomains are really owned by maximum by one team. I'm not saying one team cannot own multiple smaller subdomains, but if I can see one subdomain being owned by multiple teams, it's usually a warning sign for me, meaning that maybe we can split it somewhat so they can, again, work independently, have a high flow of change. But that would be my yardstick when I look at the team setup. Are you really working on one domain, or are these two separate subdomains that we could maybe distill there from the current setup? And then the last one, the capabilities that we use. These are really the abilities or the functions that we expect from the subdomain. And these are the things that your users do, and these are the users' needs that we need to be serving. So again, if we drill down, in our usage ingestion subdomain, you can have multiple different ways of ingesting, like using the standard formats, using the bespoke formats, and so on and so forth. So these are the individual pieces that we then work on and you get feature requests for and whatnot. So I hope that helps, to structure this a little bit. So if you struggled with that during the training, hopefully this one example will make it easier for you. So that was all that we had with Nick from the slides. I'll hand over to Manuel so we can have the Q&A part now.
Yes, thank you. That was great. I think a lot of the feedback and comments we've had on the training have been addressed, hopefully. So really good questions in the Q&A. Martin Durmeyer, sorry, I'm butchering your name for sure, but you were the first one and you have multiple questions. Let's go to your first question. It's for Nick. So Martin is saying, as you worked in a electric vehicles charging system, could you give an example for a complicated subsystem team in that context? I understand it's best not to have one if your domain allows not to have it.
Yeah, good question. And also a good point to clarify that. I don't really think there was a very clear, complicated subsystem team with the company I worked for. I think there were some subdomains that were much more complex than others. There were some subdomains involving hardware, plugging in cars and charging them up, batteries. Hardware fails in lots of different ways. So there's a lot of complexity there, a lot of knowledge about certain hardware, which was useful. But I think with a good domain expert, a good product manager who knows the domain, it was possible for developers to work in that team without needing a lot of expertise and skills. I think also there's a lot of algorithmic challenges in some areas around optimizing, about times, getting the best ROI for energy usage. But I wouldn't call that a complicated subsystem team either. I would say there are certain skills that would make some people more appropriate to work in that team. But in general, majority of developers could work there, I would say. So no, to the specific question, I don't think there was a complicated subsystem team. And to the general point, I would agree. We want to avoid them where possible. It's really only in cases where there is specialized knowledge. And in this case, there wasn't any, I would say.
If I may add just a little bit, I agree with Nick, and I think one way that I look at it is this team delivering value to the end customer, or some of the stakeholders that we have for this product or part of product. If so, even if the work is complicated, if the team can handle it sort of end to end, like take the users and requirements and deliver the solution, then that's ideal. It's only when in the middle there's something that's so complicated that you actually need a dedicated team just to take care of that algorithm or whatever it might be.
I think I can give an example, not from EV, but where I work at PayFit at the moment. I believe I'm allowed to share this information. If I get fired, well, you find it useful. But at PayFit, they have an internal low-code system they build in-house. Could I work on that? Probably not. No, they've got some really smart people working on that. I would say that's a complicated subsystem team because it's a lot of expertise about low-code systems and also how to build a low-code system for a specific domain you're working in. I think those are some of the smartest people I know. So I think that's probably a good example of a complicated subsystem team.
I'll add one more thing and then I'll shut up. I actually work with some customers that provide low-code solutions, and I can attest that there's a lot of complicated subsystems, actually quite hard in that domain to get teams that have aligned to a stream of end-to-end sort of value, because there's a lot of complexity in the core. But it's still something we should aim to minimize. You cannot avoid them in that scenario probably, but you can minimize.
Yeah, I think with good boundaries, you can isolate the bits that really are requiring a complicated subsystem team and be clear. And it's also important to understand, like, if we have these people with specialist skills, how can we avoid making them work on things where their skills aren't needed? Let's make sure that they're working where their skills are most effective. So yeah, I find good boundaries are important there for both sides.
Yeah. I would like to go to another question for Nick from Misha Hervig. Again, destroying your names. But for Nick, regarding the learning that event storming workshops benefit massively from senior leadership attendance and support, as you were saying, do you have experience also introducing domain-driven design concepts bottom up? So showing benefit in a few small teams to then get the rest of the organization on board, I guess, sort of more a grassroots approach. Is that something that you would focus on as well?
Yeah, I think I'll probably start with a caveat. It's not always good to have your senior leadership in your workshops. You need to think carefully about that one. I don't want to encourage you too much there. I think what I would advise is at the start of a workshop, can get people motivated and make them realize we do value this transformational work. We do think it's important for you to be here and not just building features. Or at the end of a workshop to come in when people are like, we've had these 3 or 4 days, we've talked about all these ideas, is it really worth it? If the CTO or someone at that level can come in and close your workshop and say, I see what you've done in these last few days. For me, this is super important. This transformational work we're doing, this modernization work we're doing is big for the company. And I appreciate the effort you've put in. So I think bookending it with some inspirational speeches can be useful. In the example I showed, we did have the CEO there. We did have the COO as well, and also the CTO. And what was valuable about that was we had these different groups, and the CTO, the CEO, and the COO, they were floating around between the different groups. So they weren't getting too involved, but they were able to observe what was happening. You could say it put people under a little bit of pressure, maybe knowing that the senior leadership was there. And I think that's true. But there were a number of moments where people might be disagreeing, like we should focus on this, or we should focus on this, or the company wants to do this, or the company wants to do this. And when the CEO just steps in and says, yeah, this is the goal, not that one, this one, just the whole group's there, the moment of clarity, you hear it from the horse's mouth, can be very useful for those reasons. So I think you'll have to make some difficult decisions there based on the people in your company about who you should invite and when you should invite. And the second point about the bottom-up approach, can it work? I think it can work. I think people are always asking, should we do top-down or bottom-up? But I think you need to use whatever you can, if you can get as much as you can at every level. In fact, it wasn't so long ago I was in a situation where it was the managers in the middle who were the ones who were, I wouldn't say resisting, I would say they were least convinced and least pushing these ideas. So it could be top down, bottom up, or middle. It could be all those areas. I'm very lucky at PayFit because they hired me when they'd already decided to adopt DDD and started applying DDD. So my job here is really just helping them to apply it, not having to convince much. But still, I think there are good techniques you can do. Something I try to do at PayFit is I try to write blog posts about the things happening in the team I'm working with, about patterns we're using, about workshop formats, technical patterns we're using to migrate from the legacy to the new system. Yeah, sometimes people from other teams contact me and ask for some help or come and spend time with their team. So I think whatever you can do, really, if you're thinking, is it worth doing bottom up only? Can I start in just one team? And is it going to go anywhere? Yeah, I think it can. I think you got to try. You got to believe that it can make a difference. And the other thing I would say is sometimes nothing happens and then everything happens. So you might be doing this in your team and you might feel like other teams aren't adopting it. The CTO is not recognizing all this stuff you're trying to improve and do things differently. But then one day things can change. There can be some dramas in the company where it's like, we have to change our approach. Might be a new CTO who comes in or a new other leader who comes in. And suddenly all this work you've done gets recognized and it does have an impact. So yeah, you can start bottom up. Should keep going, give it a try, be persistent. And also take any chances you get to influence the top down as well. If you get a chance to meet these senior people, take it, have some conversations with them, just try and build a relationship, find out what's important to them. And again, you never know, at some point, there could be a turning point, a pivotal event where you start to get more traction.
I think that's a great answer. Things are complicated. So a question for Kacper. Could you share some insights on your experience to go from nailing it to scaling it? And what were some things that happened in your current company? If you can share.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So reflecting on this journey of nailing it, then scaling it, I think really the most important bit of work we did at the beginning is that we started very small with very clear idea how we want the ways of working to be, especially in terms of that approach to platform. So self-served platform where teams can make a decision. Of course, there were boundaries around it. No, we weren't saying, okay, you can just go and do whatever. We had some certain set of technologies that we were using and so on, but teams really had ownership from the very beginning to the very end for everything that they were doing. And then we built the platform from there. So it was initially myself and one other engineer where when we started, we decided this is how we're going to work. This is how we want the CI/CD to look like and so on. And grew from there and learned from there and had, the constant feedback loops and ways of improving the platform. And I think what's very telling that this platform is still being operational. I think there is, for this bit of the platform is being used by 5 teams, and there is only one platform engineer maintaining the platform itself. So I think this is a great example of showing, okay, you don't need a very complex platform to deliver great results by the team. So that was a very telling experience, and I think one of those people that helped make it work is also on this webinar. So thank you for making this happen, because it's something that we can be proud of, and it was something that wasn't trivial to figure out, but by having people with the right mindset, we were able to make this happen. So yeah, that's also what I mentioned to you, Manuel, when we were preparing for this webinar, is like how important this connection is. We can do all the great work for trying to design the independent value streams, discovering domains, subdomains, organizing the teams. But if we don't have the right platform to support it, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and I would say even more broadly, I loved when you talked about Conway's Law and the fact that it's not just a matter of saying, well, now let's align teams to these services when you don't have sort of the infrastructure and the practices and the underlying engineering approach that can actually support that. So when that kind of change, first of all, takes time, and it's going to need teams to have, in my opinion, more agency in terms of, hey, this boundary is not really right. Maybe we were supposed to be the owners, but other teams have to change this code that we are supposed to own. How do we fix this? Or, we depend on some other service and that service is not reliable. How can we collaborate with that other team to add some tests or some way to make sure that we can actually rely on each other better? And that's the whole sensing approach in team topologies as well. It's not just defining, okay, what are the stream-aligned teams, what services should they own, but actually figure out how to, the difficult part is how do we solve those problems you're talking about. Maybe we need a platform that simplifies things because people are overloaded with having to know all these different tools, technology. So it's really, never-ending progress, and it really only works when teams have that agency to figure out, okay, we need to collaborate on this problem, or we would need something that the platform provides that allows us to reduce our cognitive load on this part of the life cycle or this part of technology. So I really like that example. Yeah, there was another question. Let's see, a question from Joanne Flynn. I think for both of you, do you have any examples of transitioning to independent value streams in the public sector?
Nick, do you want to start?
So biggest government project I worked on was probably around 2016. I don't think, Team Topologies wasn't around then, but a lot of the ideas from Team Topologies were present there, I would say. Clear domain ownership was one of them. And I would probably, if I pick out one thing, I'm going to agree strongly with Casper that I think having the platform there, I worked for HMRC in the UK government. I think having the platform is underrated sometimes, is an underappreciated aspect. You can have the best architecture, but in the UK government, that platform made it very easy to spin up new applications, put them in production in a few hours with the metrics, monitoring, logging, observability, load testing, all the things you need out of the box. And so when you reduce the cognitive load on a platform level, it gives teams more capacity to first think about the business domain, but also to focus on how do we start decoupling ourselves. If we have this mismatch where we have the old legacy system and our subdomains, as Casper showed perfectly, that's basically every project I work on, every company I work with, there's always this mismatch at the start. If you can reduce the cognitive load, and I think the platform is one aspect, and the other one I would say is having tools that make it easy for your new software and your legacy to talk to each other because they'll run in parallel. If you have those two things in place that reduce the cognitive load, then I think it makes the journey much easier and allows you to demonstrate value sooner, earlier. So I think there was a lot of things I took from that government project, but platforms, integration, two big topics.
Casper, did you want to share any experience?
Yeah, when the question was asked, I also thought about this government project, although I haven't worked on it, but I heard both from Mick and some other people like Pete Smith and so on about the platform they created. So that was quite impressive, I have to say. I don't have personally much experience working on this type of projects. I did a bit of consulting though, I think 10 years ago, for NHS in the UK, so the healthcare system. What was interesting and the problem we faced and ultimately failed on, we wanted to use all similar practices, distill the services and make it more independent. Have to say, when we look at the system from the get-go, that was the most complex database schema I've ever seen in my life. There was 700 tables and one per user in the middle with all the relations pointing to it. I think I spent 2 days even trying to find a tool that would render this schema in some approachable form. That's how hard it was. And what we faced was the inertia of the government organization. So I just wanted to sympathize that I understand it might not be as easy to make those big changes in government organizations and whatnot.
Did you find a tool?
I did find a tool. I did. I still have a screenshot somewhere and sometimes show it in the presentations. Because it's basically a dot in the middle with millions of lines going from it. That's what it is.
All right.